I have the great pleasure now to introduce our two next speakers, Tom McCarthy and Henry Blofeld. Tom has been involved ever since the beginning. He's a marathon pioneer, we can say, every year. He's also an advisor to our marathons. Tom is a London-based writer and artist, born in 1969. His award-winning debut novel, Remainder, from 2005, has so far been published in 12 languages. He is also the founder of many societies, of which the International Necronautical Society is one, kind of multiple avant-garde networks. His third novel, Sea, will be published next year. When we started to discuss the Poetry Marathon with Tom, he immediately referred to Henry Blofeld as the great voice of cricket, and he said that for him, Henry is really the most urgent participant in the Poetry Marathon, and that he would like to invite Henry. So yeah, incredibly excited to welcome Henry Blofeld, who was born in 1939 in Norfolk, and very long time commentator for Test Match Special on BBC Radio 4, as well as on Sky and ITV. He is really the voice of cricket. His autobiography, A Thirst for Life, with the accent on cricket, was published in 2001. A very warm welcome to Tom McCarthy and Henry Blofeld.
I should go ahead.
Yes.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Hans Ulrich. Okay, I'm interested in the origins and the essential framework of poetry. For the Greeks, this resided in a twofold structure. Firstly, there's a contest taking place outside of Troy, and secondly, a man called Homer has to describe it, its human drama, its formal qualities, its kinetic and aesthetic dimensions. For the Anglo-Celts, as Robert Graves tells us, it resided in a young man being forced to keep up a set of iterations to the rhythm of a drumbeat. If he paused or faltered, he was killed. Bearing both these paradigms in mind, it strikes me that the closest figure we have today to the poet is not the genteel-mannered Faber and Faber versifier, but rather the sports commentator. So when Serpentine co-director Hans-Ulrich Obrist asked me if I'd like to participate in this poetry marathon, I answered without any hesitation that I would like to have a conversation with the greatest sports commentator of our age, Henry Blofeld. I'm delighted that the Serpentine have set this up, and I'm very grateful to Henry for agreeing to participate. So let's start at the beginning. Tell us, how do you become a sports commentator?
Oh, I think first of all, you've got to have a great love of whatever you're going to talk about. I think you've got to play it too, at a reasonable level. In terms of cricket's a complicated game, so I think therefore you've got to play that at a rather more reasonable level than, for instance, if you're a football commentator, where the objects are more easy, aren't they, to understand. It obviously helps to have a voice that comes across the ether. It helps to be able to string words together. And I think it helps to be able to describe. I mean, commentating to me is not just telling you what is actually happening out there. It is describing a scene, and it is going all the way around, so you've got a three-dimensional scene, and that you're trying to bring your listener in to listen to and to appreciate.
Well, this is what really differentiates you from virtually every other commentator. They can tell you what's happening technically in the game, but you make the kind of the trees move and the buses whisk by and the birds fly overhead, and that kind of becomes part of the whole.
You dropped a catch.
I dropped a catch, sorry. I mean, is that something you kind of learned, or was it just how you see the game you're watching in the first place?
I'll tell you exactly how it happened. It was in 1969 that I did my first trial commentaries for the BBC, and I did two 20-minute spells in a game at the Oval, which Brian Johnston was covering, and they just recorded when he wasn't on the air, recorded two 20-minute spells of mine. And I then had to go, I had a letter from a chap called Henry Riddle, who was very much a Raytheon school of broadcaster, an old man. He was assistant head of outside broadcast, bracket sound, bracket, very important that. And I went off to see him at 4:45 one afternoon at Broadcasting House. And he rather wrong-footed me because he was already in a dinner jacket, and I couldn't quite understand that. But anyway, let that pass. And we listened to the two tapes. I always hate listening to myself in the same way that I hate reading myself. I always think I sound like such a pompous brat. Anyway, he said, having listened, he said, we like it, and we think you begin to paint the picture. And I said, what exactly do you mean? And he pointed to a picture on the wall beside him. It was a picture of some horses. And he said, when people look at that picture, they're going to concentrate on the horses. But if it wasn't for the grass underneath them, the trees at the side, the sky above, and then the mount, and then the frame, it wouldn't be a composite picture. He said, you are a radio commentator. You're the listener's eyes and ears, and you've got to try and pinpoint your position exactly. And if you do this, if you paint the whole picture, the listeners will know exactly where you are, and their imagination will therefore be able to come into play with much greater accuracy.
That makes complete sense. I mean, it seems on the radio, you know, there's only the voice. You know, you don't have the image like on television. You don't have, and it's in real time. I mean, do you feel there's a kind of nakedness to that? Do you feel naked on the radio almost?
Well, on the radio, you've got to, when you're commentating on a cricket match, you never talk in the past tense. So you are slightly, it's always, every over, 6 balls, 6 moments of total suspense, and you've got to be with it. And he comes and he bowls. And you don't say he bowled and, because that's rather anticlimactic.
It's true, you're always saying it afterwards. That never even occurred to me before. You're saying he just bowled, is what you mean.
You don't, yes, but you say and he bowls. I mean, you know, you're with it, he's up to the wicket and he bowls. And you're trying to be absolutely level with the action. If you talk about it posthumously, it loses its effect. And also, I mean, I think how you do it, different people do it different ways. I think it's exciting to try and, I don't know, illusions. You bring lots of things into it. I do. It's just the way I see it.
Well, that's another thing that really makes cricket completely different from football, in that it's not just action. There's a lot of inaction. In fact, there's 80% inaction, and that's kind of interesting. I mean, because it eddies back. I mean, you re-describe what just happened, and then you re-describe it again, expanding it more and more, bringing in more. This is something else that differentiates you. You use lots of similes, lots of metaphors, and in fact, even straight-up literary references. I mean,
well, I think the thing is cricket. It's a game that gives you a glimpse of eternity, isn't it? It goes on forever. If you've got a fast bowler who bowls maiden over, you've got an awful lot of time when nothing's happening, when he's walking back to bowl, and you've got to say something, and that's where all the peripheral things come in. And it's where I think as a commentator, I think you've got to show imagination. I think if you just to talk about what is actually happening, that a bowler is walking back. It's frightfully dull. And you see, a game of cricket is like a symphony concert. It goes at different paces. And when the game is exciting, the cricket takes over, and you don't go down the byways and side roads at all. You stay with the cricket, and the game looks after itself. But then when you get the slow movements, that are a little bit yawny, then you look around for extra things to bring it in, to make people sit up at home and think, well, nothing much is happening, but it's still interesting. And then it is, I think, you can let your flights of fancy run riot. And I mean, how you do that's entirely up to you. And I mean, I do it the way I do it, because I love the sound of words. I probably love the sound of my own voice. I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't. That's awful, isn't it? But do you know what I mean? I think the sound of words and the sound of the fluency of words.
Well, you're very aware of language. You're very aware of rhythm, and I mean, we were talking the other day about Tennyson, and of course he always writes in iambic pentameters, which is the classic default meter for Shakespeare and everyone. I mean, I was listening to some of your commentary, and a lot of it is actually in iambic pentameters. I mean, it's in these kind of da-da-da-da-da-da. I mean, are you aware of that? Do you practice it?
No, I don't practice it, but I think I'm aware very much of sound and what words sound like. I mean, this is awfully silly. In the James Bond films, you have dry martinis made shaken, not stirred. The original way that it was put originally was stirred, not shaken, which doesn't roll off the tongue. It's not poetic. It's not easy. And I think when I commentate, I'm very conscious of how words sound. Yep. And I think that's something you instinctively have or you don't. Yep. And I think possibly that's what I do and what I've got. Yep.
Talking of James Bond, I also found out recently there's a direct, you're in James Bond directly. I mean, the very name Blofeld is your own, right? I mean,
well, that is absolutely right, yes. Ian Fleming was a friend of mine for the last 6 years of his life, and he told me in Jamaica at his house that he started to write Thunderball, and he lived in the Chelsea Embankment, and he started to write Thunderball one evening, and he wanted an evil name and couldn't think of it. And he went to bed scratching his head, and he woke up the next morning and continued to scratch his head. And at 11:30, he got a taxi and went to his club in St. James's Street. He sank gratefully into a leather armchair, picked up a membership list, and started to look through for an evil name, and arrived. He was gobsmacked by a phalanx of 3 Blofelds, my father, my brother, and myself. And in his own words, he said, "I slammed the book shut, gave a yelp of delight, ordered a pint of champagne, and never looked back."
That's exactly what I do as a writer. Every time I think of a name, it's just the pint of champagne. That's the life.
Well, there you are, you see. I mean, why not?
But
You see, we all live in a much too rigorous life, and you write so much better after that pint, or half pint of champagne even.
Even a quarter, I think, would improve my writing, I'm sure. But talking of cricket and literature, I mean, you were a friend of the late Harold Pinter, who was an enormous cricket fan, as was Beckett. There's a huge presence of cricket in lots of Beckett's work. And you told me something astonishing about Dickens just a moment ago that I would like you to share with the group, as they say in America, because...
Well, it's extraordinary. The first England cricket tour to Australia, the oldest enemy. And we started going to Australia in I think it was 62-3. Someone will tell me I've got that wrong by 1 year or 2 years, but thereabouts, early 60s, 1860s. And the reason the first England cricket tour went was that Charles Dickens was going to Australia on a speaking tour. And at the last minute, whatever that may mean in 1860, I think 6 months, because the only way you can get news to Australia is go there and tell them, isn't it? And then come back again. But at the last minute, Dickens scratched. He said he couldn't do it. And Spears and Pond, who were the sponsors, decided to send an England cricket tour instead. And that was how the first tour of Australia actually happened.
So cricket is already a stand-in for literature, right from the off.
Well, there you are, you see.
There you go.
Yes. It sort of squares the circle, doesn't it?
It squares the circle. One last question. You mentioned playing at quite a good level, and I happen to know you played at not just quite a good level. You were a prodigy. You were age 16, 17. You were the only schoolboy to score a century at Lord's, and so on and so on. And then you, as you put it, you had an argument with a bus.
Rather a substantial argument.
Quite a substantial argument that put you in a coma for 6 months and so on.
No, 1 month.
Oh, 1 month. Sorry. Yes. A while still. And I just wonder, I mean, this is, you know, there's always this tension in literature of kind of, you know, you get it from everyone, from Thomas Mann to Cervantes, of the commentator, the describer, looking with great kind of yearning or pathos at the hero, you know, wanting to be the man of action, but being the kind of, you know, the one who narrates and describes as well. Do you feel that pathos when you describe it? Do you feel like you're looking at this was the past of a future that, you know?
I don't think I did. I think I may have done in the very early days when I was quite new to it. I felt, gosh, I was young enough, and if I could have been out there, maybe I could have done it too. I think now what fascinates me is not actually the thought that one might go out there and do it oneself. I get fascinated by what's going through a batsman's mind at a moment of tremendous pressure. I mean, you take the golf thing. I always think no sportsman is under greater pressure. Tom Watson this year, an 8-foot putt to be the oldest man ever to win the Open. Could anyone ever have been under more pressure than that?
And he missed it.
He missed it. But what's going through his mind? And I think that is the fascinating aspect of it. And I think in a way, and I tell you who did this very well in terms of cricket, and was all cricket commentary, and was also, there was a very, very strong poetic side to him, was the great John Arlott.
Oh, he wrote poetry as well.
He did,
and
indeed.
He was
and
very
I mean,
well read.
there was the poetic influence in everything that he said, wasn't there? Yeah. I mean, he had this wonderful Hampshire voice that went on like this. And if you do that on Test Match Special, you get fined. But John was wonderful. He was a great friend of the players. He was very sympathetic. If someone dropped a really howler of a catch, he would never say that was a gaper. He would always make excuses and feel sorry for the chap and try to feel what was going on in the guy's mind. And it was interesting. I mean, there are so many different commentators the ones worked with. He stands out. Brian Johnston was all very much on surface, you know, but great fun. Did it in an inimitable way. Won a lot of friends for the game. But you would have never have accused Johners of bringing in poetry to cricket or to broadcasting.
Brilliant. Well, Henry Blofeld, thank you very, very much. And thanks, Hans Ulrich and the Serpentine.